as we always say, it's fine. It's fine having the data. It's fine being data driven. It's actually knowing what to do with it that is the most important thing. And we talk about the Brentford structure. I do think Brentford and Brighton are quite interesting in that they're owned by men who specialise in analytics and algorithms, but from a betting side, don't they? From a gambling side. So these clubs, if you take someone from these clubs like Rasmus Ankersen, you're taking them out, like with a player, you're taking them out of a good structure. Doesn't mean they can necessarily replicate it where they go next.
Oh, 100%. Culture, people around you, absolute faith and commitment to the idea. These are all essential. Any organization will tell you that. I think the thing about data, which we talk about so much, don't we, on this podcast, and we write about it all the time, it is the thing, right? It's been the thing in sport for at least a decade, in the States for a bit longer. It's probably all sort of kind of started, certainly in terms of fans being aware of it with baseball. But the one thing I'd sort of say about it is that everyone's kind of doing it now. So it's no longer the competitive advantage it was when the Oakland A's were doing it, or when Saracens first started talking about it in rugby union, or when Liverpool started applying it. Everyone's doing it now, right? So the really good clubs are doing something slightly different. They haven't started telling it. Hopefully, they haven't started telling us all about it yet, but we'll be writing about it in a few years' time. And everybody who I think is now achieving some success at this is understanding the numbers they're getting. All right, well, that's a little bit irrelevant, and that's the key thing to understand now. And okay, we now know that about how this works. How do we actually sort of find those guys? What do we do with this information? And that's the trick, isn't it? That's the trick. And certainly at Brentford is an example of them getting it. From numbers to outcomes. Hasn't happened yet at Southampton. Now, does that mean it's never going to happen at Southampton? No. Does that mean that Sport Republic's ideas are wrong? No. They just haven't got it right yet. Now, I might be racing ahead here. This has been a shocking season, but they now get a chance to reset.
Yeah, you are racing it. You are racing ahead. That's to come.
All right. I apologise. Cut that bit out and then put that lot. But yeah, there we go. We're all good.
No, we'll keep it in because that's a good tease for what's to come. What's to come later, Jacob. Therefore, when we talk about the different people behind the scenes, when that has come to recruiting players, moving players on, has that made it more difficult, convoluted? Too many voices?
Yeah, I think so. I think recruitment is probably indicative of the lack of direction in the club. Like, we can talk about data, and using data is absolutely fine. It's just whether there is alignment, and that's Sport Republic's buzzword. I think if you look at the players they've signed, I would suggest the data shows up favourably. You think the £18 million striker Paul Onuachu, who was signed for Nathan Jones, he lasted 2 more games before he was sacked. Ruben Sellers came in because Southampton wanted to return to their high-pressing principles, and Paul Onuachu can't particularly run. He can't link the play, and he can't work in the red zone, which is basically a cornerstone of what they try to do under Hasenhüttl and Sellers. So if you're looking at the data perspective, it's not correct. And then there's this questions of whether some of these signings are Ankersen led in terms of he knows some agents like Onuachu. There was a midfielder in January that they liked, and it's because of he knew the agent quite well. It's whether these people on the shortlist on the recruitment are being listened to, or are they just simply feeding the data to Ankersen, who will just decide anyway what direction he wants to go in. So I think there's been the issue of alignment, and recruitment has been the underlying theme throughout. There's been a lack of youth and experience. Has been a complete imbalance, and from the summer people said this is the risky strategy. Sport Republic have to get their first full season at Southampton right. But you look at the players they've signed. They signed 10 players in the summer. Only 2 were over 25, and only Maitland-Niles had Premier League experience. So there's questions there too.
There was a report, Jacob, in the Telegraph, I think, that described one Southampton insider, to use their phrase, as saying the squad was basically slightly unfair on a couple of players, this I think, but it was basically James Ward-Prowse and a load of children.
Yeah, we've heard that a number of times throughout the season. Ward-Prowse has been carrying the bird on his shoulders a number of years, but it's been especially the case this season because if you look at the team, those who are experienced aren't necessarily always in the team, and it's leaving Ward-Prowse, who's only 28 himself, but has been around for over a decade now to carry the can. He basically does everything. He sings the theme tune, he writes the sound music, he takes the free kicks, he scores all the goals, he makes the most tackles, makes the most passes. And then you look at what he does off the pitch as well. He's the conduit between the dressing room and the board and the management. So there's a lot of pressure on him. And it's just symptomatic of the lack of experience helping to supplement those youth.
12 years ago, they were in League One.
Yeah.
So then they go promotion. First season, stabilization, competitive straight away in the Premier League. They then go, remind me here, Southampton experts, did they go 8th, 6th, 7th, 8th, something like that? They had 4 seasons of being a top half team and being that kind of Villa, Brighton, Brentford, the disruptor team, the really clever guys who get it right off the pitch, stable ownership, a good plan. At the time, the plan was all around youth development. The Southampton way. I remember people telling me that their academy was brilliant and they had a bit of an advantage. Their competitive advantage at the time was because they were on the south coast and you had that rule about your radius, how far you could go in terms of getting youngsters into your academy. They managed to persuade, perfectly reasonable, well, half of our radius is in the sea, right? So can we have another site? Their other site was Bath.
Yeah.
What did Bath get them? South Wales.
Yeah.
Who's their most famous player?
Yeah.
Gareth Bale.
Yeah.
Right. So that was their competitive advantage. They were really good at youth, and we saw the evidence of it on the pitch. But then, again, gravity sort of takes over. Bad decisions start to creep in. And what have we had for the last 4 or 5 years? It's been 17th, 15th. Last year was... They have started to drift to what I remember. And here we are again. So I don't see them as a nailed-on Premier League team. I don't necessarily see this as a complete disaster. Next year will be interesting. How do they respond? So then I've thrown it forward again. Sorry.
No. But going back to the past is actually, Jacob, that it is an important context to throw into this. I mean, you could look at Leicester as well at the moment. I know they won the title, but you can look at Leeds. You could look at Burnley last season. Clubs who have a fair to reasonable stay in the Premier League. Leeds are only in their 3rd season. I get it, but also have a model of, they do have to move players on. The big clubs do come sniffing and players are sold. And therefore, you have to rely on your data and your scouting to bring players in. And you can't hit the home run every time with the players you bring in. So at some point, you may hit the wall like this. And as painful as that is for fans to hear, there are very few clubs who are going to be immune from that. You can't keep regenerating all the time without the odd season where it's like, oh, crikey, we're in a bit of trouble.
No, you're right. Football works in cycles, and the issue Southampton had is they didn't know how to break the cycle and start afresh and stop the inevitable from happening. I think for 3 or 4 seasons they managed to sell players but continually improve through the recruitment. It was sensational, really. You think of that summer where they lost Adam Lallana, Ricky Lambert, Luke Shaw, these big players, and they replaced them with Sadio Mane, Toby Alderweireld. Then they get Van Dijk the following season, Dusan Tadic. These are players that kept making Southampton better, and you think eventually it's going to all catch up with them. And you probably, in hindsight, look back to that Ward-Prowse season. They came 8th, they got to a cup final, but that was when things started to change on the recruitment front. Sadio Mane left, Sofiane Boufal and Nathan Redmond came in. They're 2 good players, but they're not quite Mane. And I think from there on in, you look at Virgil van Dijk. He left the following season. Wesley Hoyt came in. Slowly and steadily, Southampton didn't quite hit on the recruitment. And for a team that didn't have the money just to say, okay, that didn't work, let's find another centre-back, that they started to feel it even more. And you probably could argue if Sport Republic came in a few years earlier with their added resource, they might not have been able to fix it straight away. But I think that the wounds were too deep, and this season it's been a culmination, as I said at the top, of all those errors and the misrecruitment and not being able to continue to follow that success on.
And those hits and misses come with managers as well. I mean, don't they, Dan? Let's be, for there's Pochettino and there's Hassan Hüttl. There was Nigel Adkins back in the day to get them out of the League One and the Championship. But amongst those hits, they've had a few misses as well. None more so than this season.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this season is just been a bit of a car crash since they've sacked Ralph. I mean, personally, you could sit here and say maybe they didn't give Nathan Jones enough time, but he probably talked himself out of a job more than anything. And in a weird way, he's probably perfect for what they'd need next season. But that ship has, I suspect, sailed. But yeah, it's, they even after sacking Ralph, was right, okay, we want, we're going to go for Nathan Jones. And Rasmus had looked at Jones for quite a while, was well versed in everything Nathan Jones, apart from the fact that he's a little bit of a loose cannon at times when you put him in front of the camera.
Do you think he'd spoken to people? I mean, do you think he'd spoken to people who'd been at Stoke with Nathan Jones? Do you actually think, which I have done, which is really interesting when you talk to, he was a coach at Brighton. I know people who were in the squad at Brighton under him. Do they? It's all very well looking at what he did at Luton twice, which is unbelievable. But sometimes one person fits one club. You can't do anything about that.
No. And would they have looked at what he did at Stoke? Yeah, absolutely. Would that have put them off? Clearly not. I mean, they clearly saw enough in the metrics. I mean, Nathan I can't remember what exactly it was, but he was the best in Europe at something. And my understanding is that data was shown to him by Sport Republic. That wasn't Nathan coming into the room and saying, I'm the best at Europe at this.
Yeah.
That's them telling him he's the best at Europe at this. So whatever happened at Stoke was clearly just not important. But then you look at that, and the shame of the Nathan Jones era was they were really winnable games. I think you can look back at that period now and you think, well, they were 7 games and what did they get? 3 points? Was it 3 points, Jacob? Right. That's
against Frank Lampard's Everton.
Yeah, okay, against Frank Lampard's Everton. So that killed them. But then I think they got their next appointment wrong after that. They went to Ruben Selles, who he was the common theme in the dugout from the summer. And, so he takes his part of the blame and why it didn't work out under Ralph. And then Nathan Jones. And, they tried to get Jesse Marsh and that failed. So, yeah, the managers has been poor.